friends, today we're back with another lesson from Where Love Flows Free, and today we're talking about rivers, particularly when they run dry. Rivers form the arteries of our world, and they are so important for every aspect of our lives. They provide drinking water, they provide irrigation for our crops, they provide food sources and easy travel routes. History shows us that most, if not all, ancient civilizations were built near reliable freshwater sources. Just like the Garden of Eden was watered by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, our ancestors needed water to survive. In times of extreme drought, when rivers ran dry, famine and death were often shortly behind. In our studies in Where Love Flows Free, we considered the Israelite nation and how God set them free from the Egyptians, and they crossed through the river into the Promised Land. And before they did that, their leader Moses had some wisdom and some warnings for them. He encouraged them to be true to God, to stay true to their beliefs, to honor Him, and he said that God has promised if you are obedient, blessings are just going to pour down on you. However, if you choose disobedience, instead of blessings pouring down, there will be curses. For an obedient people, God promised, the Lord will open for you His storehouse, the heavens to give rain to your land in its season, and to bless every work of your hand. And for disobedience, the Lord will make the rain on your land powder and dust. From heaven it shall come down on you until you are destroyed. In this warning, abundant water is considered the blessing, and lack of water is the curse. And God was going to rain down one of them, blessings or curses, and it was up to the people and their behavior to choose the outcome. If we jump ahead a few hundred years from Moses' warning, we see a time in history where God did fulfill His word and withhold rain to punish one of Israel's evil kings. Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all those who were before him. Now, Israel hadn't exactly been on its best behavior before Ahab became king, so to say that he was the worst out of all of them is really saying a lot. God sends the prophet Elijah to warn King Ahab that God will not be sending dew or rain for the next 3 years. That is a really long time to not have any water. Then God tells Elijah to leave Ahab's presence, and he sends him to a brook where he can drink from, and he commands the ravens to deliver Elijah food. Day by day, the water runs lower and slower, and after a while, the brook completely dried up due to the extreme drought. The river ran dry. At that point, God tells Elijah, go to this foreign city, and you're going to find a widow at Zarephath, and I've commanded her to feed you. And so Elijah gets up, and he goes to this city, and he sees a widow out there gathering some twigs. And he says, excuse me, can I have some water? And she says, let me get you some. And he says, and by the way, can I have some food too? And at that point is when it gets very real. And she turns to him and says, I am preparing my last meal, this little fire to cook the last remaining food. And after that, my son and I are going to die. And Elijah says, don't worry. Do what I asked. God is going to provide. And I love this account because when we think about resources, especially during a time of famine, usually the poorest people are hit the hardest. They have the least to fall back on. They have the least amount of money to buy what they need. And so worldly wisdom says, if you're in a tight spot, go find the people who have a lot. But God, just like in the account of Gideon, He wants to be the hero of this story. He's not sending Elijah to the richest who has what they need. He's sending Elijah to somebody who's completely run out. Her river has run dry. They're about to starve. And God chose her to be the one to feed Elijah. And she's so brave and courageous. She listens to Elijah. She feeds this stranger who claims he's from God her very last meal. And the food is gone. However, it's not. And she pours that last bit of oil out and that last bit of flour to make some bread, except for it wasn't the last bit. God miraculously keeps refilling that jar and that container of oil, so it's not completely empty. The Bible doesn't tell us that it was overflowing, just that it never ran out. And for the whole rest of the famine, They had what they needed to survive: Elijah, her son, and the widow. So even during the season of drought, God rained down blessings with those who were obedient to him. I think this account is so important because there are times in our lives when the river runs dry. Maybe not literally, but physically, emotionally, financially, or spiritually. Our bodies fail us. Depression or anxiety tightens its grip. Our faith seems to fail us or fall short. These droughts can be caused by our own disobedience, or they can be caused by somebody else's. We see that during the time of Ahab, the whole region suffered from his poor leadership. So what do we do when times of drought strike? Probably waiting for ravens is not going to be the answer for us. So let's look at the account of Elijah and see what else he did. First, we see that he let God dictate his company. Elijah was sent before the wicked king, but God didn't have him stay there. He had him remove himself from the evil king and to find solitude where God could talk to him. Secondly, he listened to God. On more than one occasion, we hear that Elijah heard the word of the Lord and he obeyed it. Third, we need to recognize that help might come from unexpected places. A poor widow gathering her last meal was probably not who Elijah expected to be the hero. But again, God uses unlikely people so that it's clear he's the hero. Fourth, we need to give generously. This widow is not the only widow in the Bible who is giving up the last of what she had. God doesn't want us to give from abundance. He wants us to give from our hearts. And finally, we need to cry out to God when we're in need. God knows what it is that we need, but he also seeks a relationship with us, and he wants us to come to him with our concerns. So let's fast forward a bit, maybe around 450 years, and we come to the prophet Malachi, and he's talking to Israel, who's again living in a very wayward way, wandering from God, and he calls them and reminds them of the same blessings that Moses gave them. This time it has to do with giving. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, so there may be food in my house, and put me to the test in this, said the Lord of armies, if I do not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you a blessing until it overflows. This time the blessings for obedience is tied to appropriate tithing and the promise that we cannot outgive God. When we give a portion, he opens the windows of heaven and pours out overflowing blessings. Consider how many blessings flowed from that dried up river. Elijah was fed. A widow who was on the brink of despair was provided for, her and her son. They were fed and they lived. We didn't talk about this in today's lesson, but if you read the account, you'll see that at some point during the famine, the widow's son became so ill, he actually died. But Elijah called on God, and God raised him from the dead. So another blessing upon blessing, her son lives. The river wasn't flowing, but God's blessings sure were. This account and so many others shows us that Jesus' living water can flow through the very driest of rivers, that God can turn seasons of drought into seasons of abundance.